Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. On behalf of our entire staff, thank you for coming. I'm a little flummoxed here because I thought that I was on air, but then I just got a message that said I wasn't. So I had a really nice introduction. I'm sorry y'all missed it. It was really good, but we'll try it again. And I apologize for being a few minutes late here today on the start. That wasn't my intention. But anyway, welcome to this webinar on updates as we look ahead to the 2018-19 school year. My name's Kurt Gibson. I'm on the administrative staff here of IHSA, and on behalf of our entire office, I want to welcome everybody to our webinar. A couple of housekeeping things, and then we'll dive into everything. First, if you have questions during the day, use the chat feature that you should be able to find on your computer screen, your tablet, your device, your mobile device, whatever it is. There's a chat feature. Send in questions as they arise during the day. I'll make sure to monitor and answer those. There could be a lot of questions that come in. We had some great dialogue yesterday. If I don't get to your question right away, don't be afraid to send it again, and I'll make sure that I see it and get everybody's questions answered. We are recording this presentation, and when we're done, one of either today's recording or yesterday's will be uploaded to our website. We'll send a note out, and then folks can either review the presentation if they were able to attend either yesterday or today. And if they weren't able to attend, then they'll be able to view it. And if you have further questions after reviewing or watching it for the first time, you can always contact our office, and any of our administrative staff will be happy to assist you. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and disappear here for a minute. I'll be back at the end, but we'll dive in to our presentation then today, and hope you enjoy it and send those questions in as you have them. All right, during our presentation today, we're going to discuss some new bylaws, 4 of which will go into effect beginning July 1st. 1 is in effect now. We'll talk about that here in a second. We'll talk about some changes in one of our policies, our policy regarding sanctioning. We'll touch briefly on a new opportunity for fans or for schools, and then fans of your school, to utilize a new digital ticketing opportunity. And then we'll end our presentation by giving you an update on an ad hoc committee that our board formed at the start of this calendar year 2018 to address classification and some other issues. First, let's talk about the bylaw changes, and the first one that we're going to discuss has to do with a change to the residence rule. And this rule is in effect now. It went into effect, as you can see here, in January of 2018, and this rule expands eligibility opportunities for students whose parents teach in a unit district that only has 1 high school, and the district has a legislative waiver from the State Board of Education to allow children of the faculty to attend that district tuition-free. So we're talking here about situations where a unit district has this legislative waiver from ISBE. They have a parent who does not live in the district. They live in a different school district, but teach in a different community than where they reside. If the district has the legislative waiver from ISBE, the children of that teacher may attend school where the parent teaches. They may do so tuition-free, and those students, upon entering high school, would have eligibility. The previous rule, the rule that we began the school year with, was more limited because it only allowed eligibility for those students whose parents were teachers at the high school. This change now, as I mentioned, would allow, for example, an elementary school or a junior high school teacher who lives in a different community than where they work. If their district had this legislative waiver, then their children could attend the school that where the parent teaches, the school district, tuition free, and if they were a high school student, have eligibility. But in all respects, it's limited to unit districts that have only one high school. So this bylaw is in effect, as I mentioned, went into effect in January. The remaining bylaw changes that we'll discuss will all go into effect on July 1st, and in some form or fashion, they all sort of deal with scheduling for various sports. And the first one has addresses a slight modification to our tournament, our season limitation as it applies to tournaments. And as you can see here on this slide, this change would simply allow baseball and softball teams, while on spring break, to play in a tournament that might consist of more than 5 games. Other sports are restricted when they play in tournaments. They're restricted in that those tournaments they participate in can only be 5 games. This modest expansion of the rule would simply say for baseball and softball only, when they're in spring break, since they're not missing school, if they were in a tournament that had more than 5 games, they could finish that tournament out, play it to its completion, and not be in violation of any season limitation rules. The next bylaw that will go into effect next year, the next change in the bylaws, I should say, affects boys and girls basketball. And this change hopefully will make things easier from a scheduling perspective for schools. Beginning next year, teams at your schools can play in a maximum of 31 games during the regular season. No longer is there this formulaic approach that a school would have to use in creating their schedule. And what I mean by that, this year, the number of regular season tournaments one of a school's basketball teams participated in, then determined how many regular season contests it could play. If a school this year played in 2 regular season tournaments, then they were limited to playing in 18 regular season games. This change simply attempts to make things much easier from a counting perspective and a scheduling perspective for schools. Now you're just limited to playing in 31 games. The restriction on 5 games in a tournament still applies, but now there's no longer any limits on regular season tournaments you can participate in. Any of your basketball teams just don't exceed that 31 total number of games. No longer are there also player limitation rules. This year, for example, players were restricted on the total number of tournaments they could play in. This change eliminates that. But we do feel like it's important to note we really want to encourage member schools to be smart about, overplaying a boy or girl in basketball in the upcoming season. There are no restrictions. So we expect there will somewhere in our state be a school that will have an individual player, play in more than 31 total games, likely a player who is playing between multiple levels. Maybe it's freshman and sophomore, maybe it's JV and varsity. The combinations are endless. Somewhere, somebody will have a player that plays in more than 31 games. That's okay. all we're suggesting from our office is, schools just need to be smart about the amount of play that they let an individual player have. If a player is good enough to be playing on multiple levels, then maybe he or she should just emphasize or focus on playing at that highest level, opening up an opportunity at a level below for someone else to get some experience. In this day and age of overuse injuries and increased concern about overuse injuries, that just seems to make some sense, at least from our office's perspective. So 31 games is the total for any one team. How you get to that 31 really now is up to you. Just don't exceed that provision. The sport of bowling also sees an increase in the number of allowable competitive dates. So bowling teams at your school can now participate on a maximum of 25 dates during the regular season. That modest increase of 5 dates really reflects the growing popularity of bowling, and by allowing some additional dates, schools will now be able to set up competitions against schools they otherwise wouldn't be able to because of that smaller number of available dates. Next change applies to volleyball. Very similar to what we saw with the change in basketball. Volleyball now moves away from this formulaic approach to determine what your schedule will look like. And now, beginning in the 18-19 school year, your volleyball teams, boys and girls, will be limited to playing in 35 total games during the regular season. So again, the limitation, the tournament limitation of being allowed to play no more than 5 matches in volleyball in one given tournament, that remains. But no longer do you have to worry about, well, if we play in 2 regular season tournaments, we're limited to then 18 regular season matches. Now you can just play 35 total matches, and how you get to that number is your business in terms of how you want to schedule things. Same thing is true about the individual player tournament limitation. That's gone. Again, we would just encourage folks to, not overplay someone. But again, we realize there's probably going to be a volleyball player somewhere in our state next year that plays in more than 35 matches during the regular season. That is not a violation. It's only going to be an issue when you have a specific team that has exceeded that 35 games during the regular season. So just monitor the games, the total number of games a team plays, and you'll be fine. Now we'll talk about some changes to the language in our sanctioning policy. This change is in effect now. The change is fairly, it's fairly modest. We'll try to explain it. We've got some examples here that will follow. And when we get through the examples, I'll post in the chat area the contact here at IHSA in case you ever have questions about an event. Does it need sanctioning? Will it be sanctioned? You'll have the contact for the person you can reach out to here at our office. But the change in the sanctioning policy language will now prohibit your school from hosting an event, meaning getting sanctioning for an event that would otherwise need it, if the event includes middle school, junior high teams, non-high school teams, whether they're of high school age students or below high school age students. You'll no longer be able to get that event sanctioned because only events that are going to be sanctioned going forward are those that involve member schools of other state associations or schools that are approved for competition by other state associations. So let's look at some examples and see if these maybe help you understand the change in this language. So in the first example, School A, or a school, I should say, will occasionally host a junior high school and high school wrestling dual meet or triangular meet against the same opponent or opponents on different mats in the same gym in an attempt to promote that as a bigger event for the wrestling communities in those towns. These are separately scheduled events. They're just coordinated by holding them in the same gym on the same night rather than in different gyms down the hall from one another. So you might go into this venue and see the two high school teams wrestling on one of the mats and the same two junior high school teams wrestling on the other mat. Is that legal? Is the question, and the answer is yes. That is not a violation because that event doesn't need sanctioning. That's not an event that would rise to the level of sanction of needing to be sanctioned. So there's no restriction, no prohibition against setting up an event like you see here. The next example. In this one, we have an IHSA member school wanting to host a 16-team girls basketball tournament over Thanksgiving at their high school. The event is named the Country Financial Turkey Tournament. School teams approved for competition in this include those from Missouri and Indiana. But before the tournament begins on the opening day is Saturday, the host school wants to contract a couple of local junior high school teams to play a game at the venue to maximize opportunity and court time and all those type of things. This would be a violation of the new language in the sanctioning policy. The event would need to be sanctioned, and in this case, the event needs sanctioning because there is a corporate partner who is sponsoring the event. There's a sponsoring entity, and it's named in the title of the tournament. So that alone would make the event need to be sanctioned. And since it needs to be sanctioned, our office would not approve it because it's got this contest. Even though it's not really in the tournament proper, it's an event connected to it's a game connected to the event, and this other game, this extra game, this almost exhibition-like game involves non-high school teams in it. So we would not approve or sanction this event. And because it wouldn't be sanctioned, it would then be illegal for IHSA member schools to participate in. Third example. Here we have fictional Tiger High School, which is a member school in Illinois. They've been invited to participate in the Kansas Relays, which takes place in Kansas City, Kansas. When Tiger High School is verifying that the Kansas Relays is an NFHS sanctioned meet, and I would just pause here and point out, if you have teams going out of state to play in events, shootouts, tournaments, things other than just a one-on-one regular season kind of contest, it would probably be wise to also connect with our office to verify if the event that you're going to out of state needs to be sanctioned, and if so, how your school can verify that it has been sanctioned if it needs to be. But in this case, we've got Tiger High School is going to go to the Kansas Relays. They noticed that there is a local junior high school team from Kansas that's also going to be participating in the relays. Is that a problem? And in this case, the answer is no. This is not a violation of our policy. However, Tiger High School needs to realize it can only compete against other high school teams approved for competition by their state association while at the Kansas Relays. But if the Kansas Relays had some other heats during the day, during the relays, where non-high school aged athletes We're going to compete against one another. That doesn't put Tiger High School in any kind of jeopardy. They, meaning Tiger High School, needs to just make sure that their athletes are not competing against junior high school athletes. And then our final example would again go back to a basketball example. We have an IHSA member school wanting to host an 8-team marquee boys basketball shootout over winter break. Member schools approved for competition include teams from Utah, Texas, Missouri, New York, and Florida, as well as a non-member school from Canada. In Canada, some of the provinces have also what amounts to a state high school association office, and they have member schools and they regulate interscholastic competition up there as well. In this example, though, we have a non-member school, a school from Canada that's not a part of any association within one of the provinces there. Do we have an issue here? The answer is yes. This is a violation. This event would not be sanctioned if a non-member school competing, which the school or the team from Canada is. This event would need to be sanctioned because we have 5 or more states involved that aren't all bordering Illinois. That would require the event has to be sanctioned, but our office would not sanction it because the school or the team from Canada is a part of the event. If the team from Canada wasn't part of the event, then it's likely our office would sanction it. I'm going to post now in the chat feature the name of Tracy Henry and Tracy's email address. If you ever have any questions about sanctioning, please contact her. I would tell you, if you're going to conduct an event that you're wondering if it would need sanctioning, there is in the sanctioning process, there are some rules, or there's some language, I should say, that would tell you as the event organizer you have to get approval a certain number of days prior to the event. So at the moment you think you might be putting on an event that might or could require sanctioning, I would encourage you to reach out to Tracy, have a little deeper conversation, and really verify whether or not the event needs to be sanctioned, and if so, how you can get that done and stuff of that nature. So that's a little bit of an update on the change regarding sanctioning. The IHSA is proud to call GoFan its official digital ticketing provider. After working with GoFan to provide digital tickets at several state series and state final events over the past year. GoFan does not require any scanning or wireless internet, as fans simply buy their tickets online and present their phone screen for a quick 2-click redemption at your entry gate. Many schools have taken advantage of digital ticketing due to its ease for both school administration and fans, its ability to provide an instant ticket audit while preventing schools from having to handle large amounts of cash, as well as its flexibility for special promotions and usage in non-sport activities like prom and graduation. Regardless of whether your school is ready to try digital ticketing, GoFan wants to provide your school with free hard copy tickets that you can use at your events in 2019 and 20. Look for an email from our office in the fall so you can sign up for those hard copy tickets, let's call them, for 2019, 2020. Those tickets will not be available through GoFan for the 2018-2019 school year, but they will the following year. And as you see here on this slide, you can contact Matt Troha at the email address there if you have any questions or want to learn more about digital ticketing. And then finally, I'd like to spend just a couple of minutes talking about the ad hoc committee that our board of directors authorized the formation of back in January. And this ad hoc committee was called the Classification Ad Hoc Committee, but they were really charged with dealing and talking about three main issues, three really important and impactful issues, and those were classification cutoffs, the waiver policy, and success adjustment. And before I go in with a little bit of a deeper dive on the outcome, let's say, of that committee, I want to just take a second to thank those committee members. These were really tough topics that they had to address, and the 16 people that served on that committee did so in a very thoughtful and professional manner. They represented schools of all makeups, all sizes, from all the geographic parts of our state, and in many cases, they found their way to common ground by being able to look at the bigger picture of what the interscholastic participation experience should be. They took off, in other words, their school hats and were able to look at these topics from the bigger perspective and not so much from the perspective of how is this going to impact my school. And so they really deserve our thanks, and certainly our office appreciates their service. The group met 5 times, I think, over the winter and the spring. If you haven't been able to see the minutes of their discussion, you can access those on our website. If you go to any of the pages on our website, you'll know that, or will have noticed that there are categories, what I'll describe as categories, across the top of any of our pages on our public side of the website. And if you get to the one on the far right, it says About the IHSA. If you put your cursor over that, a drop-down menu will appear, and if you select Advisory Committees, you'll then be taken to a page that lists all the advisory committees that our office currently has. And in the lower left-hand corner of that next screen, where all the committees are listed, you'll see a link to the Ad Hoc Committee on Classification. And if you select that link, you'll then be redirected to the page that identifies who is on the committee as well as all their minutes. We're in the final process here of getting the minutes from their last meeting, which was held Wednesday, published online. I would expect those will be available no later than first thing next Tuesday morning, May 1st. And just as an aside, hasn't May crept up on us in an awful hurry? But anyway, they'll be available no later than the start of the day on Tuesday, May 1st. The committee did make a series of recommendations, and our board will have the ability to review and act upon those if they wish at their June board meeting. The next IHSA Board of Directors meeting will be June 11th, and it will be at that point that they'll be able to consider the work of this committee. And the committee, as you see here on this slide, had some really thoughtful and good discussion on some things related to classification, waivers, and success. And I think what you're going to expect to be able to see and hear more about is the committee landed on some recommendations that would offer a fresh look at how classification is done, how waivers are assigned, how success is calculated and applied. And it really starts with this idea that the committee looked at creating what they would describe as a classification cycle. And what I mean by that is likely beginning with the 2019-2020 school year, schools would be assigned a classification that would remain constant for 2 school years. So in this example, a school would know what class they're in various sports and activities, and that would be good and constant and not change for the 2019-2020 school year and the 2020-2021 school year. The committee believes that looking at things in a 2-year window, if you will provide more stability, particularly for those schools who in the past wouldn't know until June if they were going to be up or down a class from the previous year. So the enrollment number that will be used will be an average of the 2 previous fall housing enrollment numbers reported to ISBE and then provided to IHSA. So an average of those last 2 enrollment figures will be created for each school, and that'll be sort of a base number that will then be used to determine what a school's enrollment number will be for that classification cycle. What our office expects that it's going to be able to do is be able at the end of, in the year leading up to the start of a new cycle, then our office would be able to announce, for example, in December, what all of the fall sport classifications will be for schools for then those next 2 years. So once we, for example, if these recommendations were approved by the board of directors at the end of the upcoming next year, the fall tournaments, we get into December, our office would be able to announce then what the classifications for schools would be for fall tournaments for that first classification cycle. So schools, if they were going to move up or down a class, would have an additional period of time to adjust their schedules. Then once the winter tournaments are done, our office would be in a position to announce the winter classifications for that 2-year cycle. And then when we get into this time of year and we complete our spring tournaments, again, we'd be able to announce classifications for spring tournaments for that next cycle. So being able to release things in this rolling kind of fashion will give people the opportunity to have this 8 to 10 month period to prepare and plan and schedule accordingly. So that's a big idea that the committee has advanced forward. Now, continuing along this 2-year classification cycle idea, then waivers would be applied based on a non-boundary school program's achievement during that 2-year snapshot. So everything now begins to shrink from a 4-year snapshot that's currently being used to a 2-year snapshot. And in looking at that, the criteria that's used to assign waivers currently was also recommended to be modified by the ad hoc committee. And you'll be able to see exactly how that criteria was modified or was recommended to be modified once the minutes are posted. But I think for now, without trying to cloud the issue too much, I think it's just best to say things would be looked at based on this committee's recommendations in these 2-year snapshots that probably more accurately reflect the current status of a program and don't carry over achievement further back in the past to a more contemporary setting. The same kind of approach would then be employed for the success adjustment, a narrowing of the snapshot from 4 years to 2 years. And then once schools are assigned in a given class, they remain there, like I said, in that class during the 2 years, irrespective of how someone might perform during that particular cycle. It wouldn't be until the next cycle that adjustments would be made. A final piece in terms of recommendations that the committee advanced forward then looks at how classifications are calculated. And one of the recommendations from the group was to move wrestling from being a sport whose classifications are set up in a 33 and a third percent, 33 and a third percent, 33 and a third percent. So in other words, putting a third of each entered schools into the three classes that are offered in wrestling, dividing wrestling by placing the smallest 40% of the entered schools into Class 1A, the next 30% of schools in 2A, and the largest 30% of schools into 3A. That's one of the committee's recommendations. The other main recommendation would say for all the bracketed team sports, whether they're in 3 or 4 classes. So we're now talking about boys and girls soccer, volleyball, girls volleyball, baseball, softball, girls basketball, and boys basketball. Those 7 sports would use a fixed cutoff number for classes that would be calculated based on an analysis of applied percentages to the sport that has the least amount of participation out of the 4 class sports. So what would happen here is currently the 4 class sport that has the least amount of participation is softball. So a calculation would be made that would put the smallest 27.5% of schools in Class 1A, the next 27.5% in 2A, the next 22.5% in 3A, and the largest 22.5% in Class 4A. It would create then a series of cutoffs, and whatever those cutoffs were, they would be applied to all the sports that I mentioned. Doing that accomplishes a few things. It brings some consistency, first and foremost, to our schools. A school will know that, I'm a 1A school, a 2A school, whatever it might be, and not have this concern about, well, in one sport we might be in 1A, and another sport we might be 2A. There could be some outliers to that. There could be some non-boundary school programs that may find themselves in one class for a sport and in a different class for another sport. But we believe that with the possible adjustment of the waiver criteria, those outliers will be very rare. So in addition to the consistency across those sports, like we mentioned, schools will be able to know further in advance how they can, their needs for scheduling. So we think this approach will bring, and the other thing this approach does is it finds a middle ground, if you will, between our current model that separates schools in these multiple class tournaments in a way that splits the pie sort of evenly, 25, 25, 25, 25, and it's not quite as dramatic as original approaches that our office used. For years, our office, generally speaking, had 60% of the entered schools in a given tournament in either the smallest class or the 2 smallest classes, with the remaining 40% of the schools in the larger or the largest or the 2 largest classes of a tournament. So this approach really strikes a balance between where we've been and where we are. And like I said, provide some consistency across sports for folks. So again, really, really good discussion, tough topics, but as I mentioned earlier, a group of people that deserves our appreciation for being able to look at the bigger picture and make some recommendations that should benefit all schools and all students. Like I said, though, those minutes from their last meeting that shows all their recommendations in detail will be available no later than first thing Tuesday morning, May 1st. So that ends this webinar that provided a preview of the 2018-2019 school year. I hope it's been informative. If you have questions, again, use the chat feature. I'll remain here online for a few minutes to see if any questions come in, and I'll answer those. But absent any, I would just wish everybody a great end of their school year. Hopefully, the weather's going to remain nice, and we'll be able to get all our contests in. And certainly when people can get outside and be active, it always seems to put an extra little spring in our step. So hopefully we've turned the corner with weather, and things will end up reasonably quiet at your school without any great drama or any kind of problem. So enjoy the day, enjoy the weekend, and look forward to seeing everyone real soon. If you have any questions, I'm going to disappear again, but I'll remain online and handle those as they come in. Thanks again, and enjoy your day. Question has come in regarding sanctioning. And the question asks, in this case, it happens to be cross country, could really apply to any sport, but goes to an event in Wisconsin and there are some non-high school teams. What do we need to do? I would recommend, number one, you verify that the event has been sanctioned. While I'm finding out if the event has been sanctioned, I would be trying to identify whether or not these non-high school teams are going to be teams your school is going to compete against. Without knowing exactly who the non-school teams are, I would say that your school is not going to be allowed to compete against junior high school teams. So I think there's a couple of pieces that you're going to want to, a couple of pieces of information that you're going to want to find out, and then I would probably again encourage you to speak a little bit with Tracy about whether or not the event needs sanctioning. Another question has come in: if classification approves, if the recommendations from the ad hoc committee are approved, will it affect next year or 1920? That's a great question. Certainly, certainly the board, if they were so inclined, could choose to implement those changes next year. So in other words, for the 2018-19 school year, our recommendation would be, though, that that we wait until the 2019-2020 school year, just because trying to make this kind of change in a short amount of time might create a few more hurdles than we're ready for. It'll give everybody time on the school end to plan and schedule accordingly. It'll give us in the office a chance to make sure all our plans are set up as well. So I wouldn't expect, if the changes are approved, that they go into effect next year, but that's a decision that our board will have to eventually make. Well, I think I'm going to sign off then. I appreciate it. Seems like we've worked our way through some questions. As I mentioned earlier, you can always contact any of our administrative staff here at any point in time if you have other questions. Once we have this presentation up on the website, we'll post a message for everyone, likely post that in the school center so you know where you can go and access the recording. And if questions arise after reviewing that, feel free to give us a shout. Thanks again for your attendance. Have a great day.